The blades of the helicopter sliced through the crisp suburban air, sending a powerful gust rippling across the neatly trimmed lawns of Willow Creek, a pristine gated community where order reigned supreme. Jack Reynolds, a seasoned U.S. Senator, exhaled deeply as he expertly guided his private chopper down onto the sprawling backyard of his luxurious estate, the engine's roar fatting into a low hum as it settled. It had been a brutal week in Washington, endless meetings, heated debates, and the kind of political nonsense that could wear down even the most hardened public servant. And all Jack craved now was a quiet weekend at home, sipping whiskey, savoring a perfectly cooked steak, and unwinding with his family. But as the dust kicked up by the landing began to settle, trouble was already brewing, its shrill herald cutting through the peaceful evening like a knife. Corinne Thompson, the self-appointed dictator of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, came storming across the lawn, her arms flailing as if she were conducting a symphony of outrage, her perfectly coiffed blonde bob bouncing with every furious step she took. Corinne's expensive yet slightly dated pantsuit strained against her frame as she approached, her indignation practically bursting at the seams, and she jabbed a manicured finger at Jack with the ferocity of someone accusing him of a capital crime. "Absolutely unacceptable," she screeched, her voice piercing the calm like a siren. "You cannot land a helicopter here. This is a residential neighborhood, not an airport." Jack sighed, already regretting his return as he peeled off his aviator sunglasses, giving her a measured look that teetered between amusement and exhaustion, debating whether her tantrum even deserved a response. Corinne, however, never needed an invitation to keep going. She stomped closer, her monologue in full swing. "This is a blatant violation of HOA rules. There are strict guidelines about noise levels, air pollution, and property values, and that contraption," she gestured wildly at the sleek, multi-million-dollar helicopter behind him, "is dragging down the integrity of our entire community." Running a hand through his graying hair, Jack crossed his arms, his patience thinning but his tone steady. "Corinne, this is my property. I own it, and last I checked, I'm a U.S. Senator with access to legal experts who'd love to dissect your so-called guidelines with a fine-tooth comb." Corinne's lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line, her face twitching with irritation. She wasn't accustomed to defiance, having ruled the HOA with an iron fist cloaked in petty bureaucracy for years, intimidating residents into submission with threats of fines and reprimands. But Jack wasn't some timid suburbanite cowed by her wrath. He'd spent decades outmaneuvering political sharks far more dangerous than this neighborhood tyrant, and her bluster barely registered as a challenge. "Well," she huffed, adjusting the gaudy pearl necklace strangling her throat, "rules are rules. The HOA has full authority to prohibit unauthorized aircraft landings within this community." Jack let out a short, dry laugh that only deepened her scowl. "And when exactly was that rule made, Corinne? Because I read the HOA bylaws when I bought this place, and I don't recall a single word about helicopters." Her eyes darted left and right, searching for an escape before she straightened up and declared, "It's an unspoken rule, a matter of common sense and respect for the neighborhood." Jack's smirk widened as he shot back. "Unspoken rules don't hold up in court, and since you're so big on common sense, let me clarify something. The FAA regulates private airspace usage on private property, meaning my helicopter, as legal here as a car in my driveway." Corinne's face flushed a deep crimson, her composure cracking. But before she could muster a retort, a few curious neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion, some smirking at the unfolding drama while others hovered nervously, wary of crossing the HOA queen. Corinne Thompson stood there, her face a mask of fury as the flush of crimson deepened, her manicured hands trembling with the effort to maintain her crumbling authority, while Jack Reynolds leaned casually against his helicopter, unfazed by her outburst. The small crowd of neighbors lingered at the edges of the scene, their whispers and smirks forming a quiet chorus that only fueled her indignation, and she finally spat. "You'll be fined for this, Senator. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting to formally ban all aircraft from this community." Jack stared at her for a beat, then shook his head in disbelief, his voice thick with exasperation. "Corinne, I literally write laws for a living. Do you really think you can out-legislate a sitting U.S. Senator?" But Karen was beyond reason, her crusade consuming her as she whirled around, her heels clicking furiously against the pavement, tossing a parting shot over her shoulder. "You'll regret this. The HOA has more power than you think." Jack exhaled slowly, watching her storm off toward her house, no doubt to rally her loyal minions for another round of bureaucratic warfare, and turned to his wife, who'd been observing from the porch with a bemused tilt of her head. "So," she said dryly, "that went well." Jack chuckled, shaking his head as he climbed the steps to join her. "I just wanted a quiet weekend, but now I guess I'm at war." That night, as he sat in his study nursing a glass of whiskey, his phone buzzed with a message from a neighbor, a forwarded email from the HOA titled Urgent Meeting. Discussion of immediate helicopter. Jack smirked, nodding Karen's predictability, if nothing else. Fine, he thought. If she wanted a fight, she'd get one, but what she didn't realize was that she wasn't tangling with some helpless homeowner. She was up against a man who'd spent his career dismantling bureaucratic nonsense. And when it came to battles like this, Jack Reynolds never lost. With a final sip of his drink, he leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. Let the games begin. The next evening, Jack arrived at the HOA meeting primed for battle. The community center's conference room packed with homeowners, most wearing blank expressions, resigned to whatever absurd decree Karen was about to ram through, while she stood at the front, smug as ever, clutching a thick binder in one hand and a gavel in the other, presiding over the room like a suburban Supreme Court justice. Karen cleared her throat with dramatic flair and launched into her speech. "Good evening, everyone. I've called this emergency meeting because of an urgent, deeply concerning issue threatening the integrity of our beloved community." Pausing for effect, her beady eyes scanning the room for a nod of agreement that never came. "Yesterday, an unauthorized helicopter landed within our neighborhood, violating multiple HOA regulations and posing a serious safety hazard. Therefore, I propose an immediate permanent ban on all aircraft within Willow Creek." A murmur rippled through the crowd, though no one seemed particularly outraged. Most were there out of obligation, hopping to escape before Karen pinned them with some trivial fine like parking an inch too far from the curb. Jack crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair near the back, waiting his turn as Karen flipped through her binder. "As you all know, the HOA exists to protect property values and maintain our peaceful nature. Helicopters, as I'm sure we can all agree, do not belong in a residential area. They're loud, disruptive, and frankly an eyesore." She snapped the binder shut. "I'm calling for a vote. All in favor of banning helicopters, say aye." Before anyone could blink, her clique of loyal supporters, mostly HOA board members terrified of her wrath, shouted their approval, and Karen slammed the gavel down. "The motion is passed." The echo of Karen's gavel still hung in the air as she declared the helicopter ban passed, her triumphant smirk radiating across the community center. But Jack Reynolds rose from his seat in the back, his calm but firm voice cutting through her victory. "That was fast. I have a few questions before you start inventing new rules." Karen spun toward him, her icy glare sharpening. "Senator Reynolds, as a member of this community, you're welcome to voice your concerns, but the decision's already made." Jack ignored her dismissal, pulling out his phone with a casual air. "That's interesting, because I just checked the original HOA bylaws, and there's not a single mention of aircraft bans anywhere in the official regulations. You can't enforce a rule you just conjured up on the spot." Karen's eyes narrowed, but Jack pressed on, his tone steady and unrelenting. "And more importantly, the Federal Aviation Administration has jurisdiction over private airspace. Any restriction you try to impose is meaningless. Legally, my helicopter's no different than a car parked in my driveway, and your little vote changes nothing." The room fell silent, a few homeowners exchanging glances as the realization dawned that Karen might not hold the ultimate authority she'd always claimed, her smug expression flickering into frustration. Karen forced a tight smile, crossing her arms as she tried to regain control. "The HOA has every right to enforce neighborhood standards, Senator. If we determine helicopters disrupt our community's harmony, we have the power to restrict them." Jack shook his head, his voice edged with dry amusement. "You don't have that power, Karen. FAA regulations override any HOA rule. I can land my helicopter on my property whenever I want, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it." Her face flushed an alarming shade of red, her composure fraying. "We'll see about that. You might push people around in Washington, but I run this community." Jack smirked. "That's cute, but I deal with scarier people than you every day. You're not even in my top 10. A chuckle broke from someone in the back, the sound spreading like wildfire until several homeowners were laughing quietly, shaking their heads at the absurdity of Corinne's unraveling tantrum, her grip tightening on the gavel as if it could somehow restore her dominance. "If that's how you want to play it," she hissed through gritted teeth, "then fine. I'll file formal complaints against you for noise ordinances, safety hazards, and every violation I can dig up." Jack raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Filing them with who exactly? The police department I work with regularly. The officials who already know my helicopter's legally permitted." Corinne's confidence wavered for a split second, but she masked it with a snarl. "This isn't over," before storming out, her confused followers scrambling after her like lost ducklings. Jack sighed, rubbing his temple as he exited the meeting, hoping she'd take the legal facts and back off, but knowing Corinne, she thrived on power and wouldn't stop until she either won or crashed spectacularly. His phone buzzed as he reached his car, a message from his assistant. "Corinne just filed a noise complaint with the city and requested an official inspection of your property. Apparently, you're a safety risk to the entire community." Jack chuckled, shaking his head. She was escalating, which meant she was desperate, and if she wanted a war, she'd just officially started one. Jack Reynolds never lost a war, and Corinne was about to find out why. Climbing into his car, he muttered to himself, "Game on," already plotting his next move against the HOA tyrant who'd underestimated him one too many times. Jack woke the next morning to the sound of his wife's laughter drifting from the kitchen, and as he shuffled downstairs, still groggy, he found her leaning against the counter, scrolling through her phone with a grin. She turned the screen toward him, revealing a neighborhood group chat ablaze with messages. Corinne had gone door to door, warning residents about the dangerous helicopter in their midst, claiming it was only a matter of time before someone got hurt, and even spinning a wild rumor that Jack's chopper was part of a secret government surveillance operation spying on Willow Creek. Jack sighed, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "She's really leaning into the paranoia, huh?" His wife smirked. "Oh, it gets better. She's organizing a Protect Our Community protest in front of our house this afternoon." Jack nearly choked on his coffee. "She's what?" "Rallying the HOA board and some gullible residents to stand on our lawn with signs," she said, shaking her head. "I swear that woman has too much free time." Setting his mug down, Jack rubbed his temples. "All right, I'll let her embarrass herself for a bit, then remind her she's picking a fight she can't win." By afternoon, Jack stood at his office window, watching a small but determined group of HOA loyalists gather on his lawn, Corinne front and center, waving a shoddy sign that read "No to Noise Pollution," while another neighbor hoisted one proclaiming "Respect our peace," and an older woman clutched a baffling "Save the Children." His phone buzzed, a text from Greg, his retired firefighter neighbor who despised Corinne's antics. "Your fan club's here. Should I bring popcorn?" Jack chuckled, replying, "Give it 5 minutes, she'll be screaming," before stepping outside, hands in his pockets, as Corinne turned to him with all the theatrics of a self-styled revolutionary. "Senator Reynolds," she bellowed, her voice dripping with fake authority, "on behalf of Willow Creek's residents, we demand you remove that helicopter and respect this neighborhood's peace." Jack glanced around at the sparse crowd, then back at her. "Respect the peace? You're the one on my lawn with a megaphone." Corinne's face twitched as he nodded toward Greg, lounging on his porch like it was a comedy show. "You hear that, Greg? They're peacefully trespassing." Greg grinned. "Sure looks that way." Corinne's nostrils flared. "We're within our rights to protest. This is about our community's safety and comfort." Jack eyed her coolly. "You can stand here all day with your signs, Corinne, but it won't change the fact that my helicopter's legal. Your rule doesn't override federal law." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a hiss. "You may have your fancy government connections, but I have something you don't: community support. These people trust me, and if I say your helicopter's a threat, they'll believe me." Jack crossed his arms. "So you're just making stuff up now, telling people I'm endangering them when I haven't broken a single law?" Corinne smirked. "Public opinion matters more than laws, and in this neighborhood I control public opinion." Jack stared at her, then shook his head. "You're about to learn a hard lesson about pushing too far." She scoffed. "Oh, please, what are you going to do, sue the HOA?" Jack smiled thinly. No, but I've got friends in high places who love dealing with petty bureaucrats like you. Her smugness faltered briefly before she rallied her protesters. We'll continue our fight against noise pollution and government overreach. We won't back down. Jack sighed, retreating inside where his wife waited, arms crossed. So how'd that go? She thinks she's winning, he said, and she rolled her eyes. She's delusional. Jack watched from the foyer as Corinne's protest fizzled out, her ragtag group dispersing under the weight of their own absurdity, and he pulled out his phone, dialing a contact with a wry grin. Hey, I need a favor. Someone's playing dirty with property regulations, and it's time for a little legal education. The next morning, a city inspector arrived at Corinne's house, clipboard in hand, catching her off guard as she answered the door in her robe, still half asleep, blinking in confusion at the official standing on her doorstep. Mrs. Thompson, he said flatly, we've received several complaints about unauthorized modifications on your property. We'll need to conduct an inspection. Corinne's eyes widened, her voice shrill with disbelief. What? That's ridiculous. Who complained? The inspector flipped through his notes, unmoved. I can't disclose that, but according to our records, your backyard fence is 3 inches over regulation height, your deck lacks proper permits, and your front lawn decorations violate the HOA's aesthetic guidelines. Corinne spluttered. That's absurd. My fence has been here for years. But the inspector just shrugged. And yet here we are, stepping past her to begin his assessment while she trailed behind, her protests growing increasingly frantic. By noon, Corinne was teetering on the edge of a meltdown, having spent the morning arguing fruitlessly with the inspector, who handed her a list of violations requiring immediate fixes and steep fines that left her packing her driveway, yelling into her phone. Jack watched from across the street, sipping coffee as Greg strolled over, chuckling. You did this, didn't you? Jack smirked. I've got no idea what you're talking about. But Greg shook his head. She's unraveling. Jack nodded. She brought it on herself. She wanted to play dirty. Now she's seeing what happens when you pick the wrong fight. Greg laughed. I think this is just the beginning, and Jack agreed. Oh, it is. Corinne thinks she's at war with me, but she doesn't realize she's already lost. Over the next 2 days, Corinne spiraled into full panic mode. The inspector's notice had detailed every infraction on her property, from the fence to the unpermitted deck, and the fines were mounting fast. A bitter irony given how she'd spent years wielding the same rules like a cudgel against others. Now, under scrutiny, she floundered, her composure replaced by wild gestures and ceaseless phone arguments, her once imposing presence shrinking with every passing hour as neighbors began to whisper about her downfall. Jack arrived at the next emergency HOA board meeting early, settling into a back seat as Corinne took her usual spot at the front, gavel in hand. Though her commanding aura had faded, she looked exhausted, her eyes shadowed from sleepless nights, and the board members beside her shifted uncomfortably, less like loyal lieutenants and more like rats eyeing a sinking ship. Clearing her throat, she tried to muster her old authority. We're here to discuss ongoing violations in our community. It's come to my attention that outside forces are interfering with our ability to enforce regulations, and we must act to protect the HOA's integrity. Jack smirked, calling out, By outside forces, you mean city officials enforcing real laws, the ones you've twisted to your advantage for years. Corinne shot him a venomous glare. Senator Reynolds, this isn't about personal disputes. It's about maintaining order. Jack leaned back. Oh, it's very personal. You tried to punish me for something legal and now the law's coming for you. How's that feel? Corinne slammed her gavel down. This is harassment. You're using your political power to target me. Jack chuckled. No, Corinne, I didn't file those reports. Turns out when you bully people with fines and threats for years, they remember. I just reminded a few neighbors they could request inspections too. The rest, that's all you. The room buzzed with a low murmur as Jack's words sank in, the homeowners exchanging glances while Corinne's gavel trembled in her hand, her face twisting into a mask of frustration as she realized her iron grip on Willow Creek was slipping. Harassment! She snapped again, her voice rising, but Jack just leaned back, unfazed. I didn't have to lift a finger, Corinne. Years of fining people for mailbox colors, grass height, even curtain shades. They've been waiting for this. I only gave them a nudge. The tension shifted palpably. Over time, Corinne had built a reign of terror on petty rules, and now that those same standards turned on her, the fear she'd wielded began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet rebellion among the residents she'd long intimidated. Richard, an older HOA board member, cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Karen, we need to be realistic. The fines on your property could bankrupt our emergency funds if we try to cover them." Karen whirled on him, stunned. "You're not suggesting we let them stand?" Richard met her gaze steadily. "We don't have a choice. You've enforced every little rule for years, and now they're being applied to you. We can't just rewrite them to save you." Jack watched as Karen's composure cracked further, her power unraveling before the very people she'd controlled. She'd thrived on the belief that no one would dare challenge her. But now, not only was she challenged, she was being abandoned. Straightening her spine, she clutched at her last shred of defiance. "If the board won't support me, I'll take legal action. I'll fight this in court." Jack sighed, almost pityingly. "You don't have a case, Karen, and even if you did, can you afford a legal battle? You're drowning in fines, and your HOA salary isn't exactly funding top-tier lawyers." Her mouth opened, then closed, words failing her for the first time, and the meeting ended in disarray, the board murmuring about her replacement as she stormed out, her once loyal followers trailing uncertainly behind. The next day, Jack's legal team called with an update. "Karen tried one last desperate move, pushing an emergency order to have you removed from the neighborhood as a community threat," his lawyer said, chuckling. "It didn't even get off the ground. The judge tossed it immediately." Jack laughed. "I'm guessing there's more." "Oh, yeah. Since she misused HOA funds to file it, she's now under investigation for financial misconduct." Jack grinned, savoring the irony as he leaned back in his chair. Karen's own tactics had finally buried her, and later that evening he sat on his back patio, sipping a drink as the sun dipped below the horizon, his helicopter gleaming in the yard, untouched and fully legal. Across the street, a moving truck idled in Karen's driveway while she paced inside, her silhouette frantic against the curtains, and Greg wandered over, beer in hand. "So I hear she's selling her house." Jack nodded. "No choice, fines, legal fees, and the board turning on her. She's done." Greg whistled low. "You outplayed her." Jack shrugged. "She outplayed herself. I just let her." Days later, an official HOA letter arrived. Karen had been voted out as president, a new board was forming, and whispers of revising her absurd rules floated through the neighborhood. Then came the final blow. Her house sold, and Jack made one last move, buying it himself, watching from his patio as she loaded her last box into a car, shooting him a venomous glare before speeding off, leaving behind the kingdom she'd once ruled. Greg stood beside him, shaking his head. "You really bought her place?" Jack sipped his drink, smirking. "Oh, I've got plans." Jack stood on his back patio, the evening air cool against his skin as he watched the last traces of Karen's reign vanish. Her moving truck had long since rumbled away, and Willow Creek felt lighter, as if the neighborhood had collectively exhaled after years under her thumb. For too long, she'd ruled like a petty dictator, fining residents for the slightest infractions. Mailbox colors, grass length, anything she could pin a penalty on. But now she was a fading memory, her downfall a cautionary tale whispered among the trimmed lawns. The HOA board had been reshuffled, new faces replacing her loyal cronies, and for the first time, people weren't living in fear of a knock on the door over some ridiculous violation. The absurdity of it all made Jack chuckle as he sipped his drink, reflecting on how Karen's own obsession with rules had crushed her when they turned back on her. Greg ambled over, a cold beer in hand, glancing at the freshly installed sign in Karen's old front yard. Bold letters reading Karen Memorial Landing, burst into laughter, shaking his head. "You know, she's never recovering from this. Words spread citywide, she's a punchline now." Jack smirked. "That's what happens when you make yourself the villain. People love watching a tyrant fall." Greg took a sip, still grinning. "So what's next? You taking over the HOA entirely?" Jack waved a hand. "No chance. I don't need that headache, but I did agree to sit in as an advisor just to keep the new board from picking up any Karen-esque habits." Greg nodded approvingly. "Keeping them in check, huh?" "Exactly," Jack said. "No more nonsense rules or harassment. People should live in their homes without worrying if their flower pots are the wrong shade of beige." That evening, a text from a new HOA board member pinged his phone. They wanted him at the first official meeting under fresh leadership, and though he wasn't thrilled about another night of HOA debates, this one felt different. It wasn't about power grabs or absurd restrictions, but about repairing what Karen had broken. He arrived at the community center to find a transformed atmosphere. Gone was the oppressive tension of Karen's reign, replaced by a relaxed energy as homeowners, once silenced by fear, now spoke freely, even excitedly, about the changes ahead. The new board proposing to scrap outdated fines and focus on actually supporting the community rather than strangling it. Jack settled into a seat, listening as Richard, the newly elected HOA president, turned to him with a smile. "Senator Reynolds, I never thought I'd see an HOA meeting that didn't feel like a courtroom trial. I think we owe you for that." Jack shrugged it off. "I just gave Karen something she never expected: consequences." Richard laughed. "Well, it worked, and the board voted on something special to mark the occasion." Curious, Jack raised an eyebrow as another member slid a framed certificate across the table, and he read aloud, "Official HOA approval, Senator Jack Reynolds' private helicopter landing zone," bursting into laughter at the sheer audacity of it. Richard grinned. "Consider it our way of ensuring no one ever tries to ban your helicopter again." Jack shook his head, chuckling. "This is pretty satisfying, I'll admit." After the meeting, he walked home under a starlit sky, passing Karen's old house, now his, where a fully permitted helipad gleamed in the backyard, a permanent middle finger to her legacy. Back on his porch, his wife waited with 2 glasses of whiskey, handing him one. As she sat beside him, gazing at the quiet street. "So you won," she said, sipping her drink. Jack smirked. It was never a real competition. She thought rules only applied to others. That was her mistake. Jack leaned back on his porch chair, the whiskey glass cool in his hand as he and his wife sat in comfortable silence, the neighborhood stretching out before them in a rare, unbroken calm. Karen's absence had lifted a shadow from Willow Creek, leaving behind a peace Jack had originally come home seeking. His wife sipped her drink, smirking. "That poor woman, she really thought she could beat you." And Jack shook his head, a dry laugh escaping. "She thought rules were her weapon, not realizing they turn on her the second someone fought back." The irony wasn't lost on him. Karen had spent years bending the HOA into her personal fiefdom, only to be undone by the very system she'd weaponized. Her downfall sealed the moment she underestimated a man who'd built his career dismantling bigger bullies than her. In the distance, a faint whir grew louder, and Jack glanced up, grinning as a helicopter approached. His friend stopping by for a visit, free to land without a single HOA screech echoing through the air. And as it descended onto the newly minted Karen Memorial landing pad, dust swirling around the yard, he couldn't help but savor the poetic justice of it all. The chopper's engine powered down, and Greg wandered over from across the street, watching the landing with a shake of his head. "You know, I think this is the first time an HOA's actually made a neighborhood better instead of worse." Jack grinned, raising his glass. "There's a first time for everything," and took a sip, feeling a deep satisfaction settle in. He'd come home craving a quiet weekend, only to stumble into a ridiculous war with the most stubborn HOA president imaginable. Yet he'd emerged with exactly what he wanted. His home, his peace, and his helicopter parked proudly on land Karen once lorded over. The sign in her old front yard gleamed under the fatting light, a permanent reminder of her defeat, and Jack had wasted no time after buying the place, clearing the backyard into a proper helipad with full FAA approval, turning her former stronghold into a monument to her miscalculation. His friend climbed out of the cockpit, waving as he approached, and Jack stood to greet him, the evening settling into the relaxed retreat he'd envisioned before Karen's crusade had derailed it. Looking out at the transformed neighborhood, Jack reflected on how quickly things had shifted. The new HOA board was undoing years of petty tyranny. Residents were breathing easier, and the absurdity of Karen's rules was already fatting into neighborhood lore, replaced by a cautious hope that Willow Creek could be a community again, not a battleground. His wife nudged him. "You think she'll ever come back?" Jack snorted. "Not a chance. She's got no power left to wield, and after this, no one's letting her near an HOA again." Greg chuckled. "Good riddance. She should have known better than to pick a fight with you." Jack nodded, his smirk widening. "She should have." And as the three of them settled onto the patio, the night air filled with easy conversation, the helicopter sitting quietly in its new home, a symbol of victory over a tyrant who'd never understood the rules she loved to enforce. Jack exhaled, leaning back with his drink, the scent of jet fuel mingling with the sweet satisfaction of a battle well won. He'd crushed bureaucratic nonsense in Washington for decades, and now he'd done it in his own backyard, ensuring Willow Creek would never bow to another Karen Thompson. Raising his glass to the sky, he muttered to himself, "Nothing beats the taste of peace and a little revenge," and took a long, contented sip.